Hi, Kim from stampingimperfection.com. Thank you for joining me today. I have a technique that I'm very interested in sharing with you today. I've been doing taking a lot of watercolor classes and doing all kinds of experimenting with different things. And I've been doing a lot of ink blending techniques and using stencils and things like that. And today I learned a technique to combine watercoloring with stencils. And I love this technique. I thought it was so pretty that I really wanted to share it with you. And I've created these two cards, and you can see the subtle background there. Isn't that pretty? And this one's a little bit different because I used a different stencil. I just thought it was quite a nice technique, and it really was quick and easy to do, so I thought I'd share it with you. And you don't need a lot of supplies. You can use supplies you have in your craft room. Today I'll be using Catherine Pooler's new Eat, Sleep, Create stamp set. It's a fantastic new stamp set that she just came out with, and it's not only just create stuff, but create happiness, create every day, create sunshine, eat, sleep, create. It's actually really pretty fun. And plus it's got a few images there that you can actually do a lot of things with. You can also get this little create die separately, and it creates this gorgeous little create script word, which I love. So let me go ahead and share with you the two stencils that I used on my cards. I used Catherine Pooler's Swoop stencil on one card, and the other one I used was the Mod Flower stencil, and that's the one I'm going to show you now. So for this technique, basically you need a piece of watercolor paper. I'm using a piece of Master's Touch from this watercolor pad. It's already cut 4x6, and I really like this little pad. It's cold pressed paper. It's got some nice texture on one side, fairly smooth on the other, but I like that it's a good card size, so I don't create this huge thing that I really love and then have to cut it up too much. I'm only going to have to trim this down a little bit to fit on the front of my card. I've got some Arteza watercolors here. Now you can use your inks. Certainly if you have the Ranger inks, the Distress inks or the Oxide inks, or if you have Stampin' Up inks or Catherine Pooler inks, those are dye-based inks. They're water-based dye inks. Certainly those work fine. I usually use them. It's just that I have been taking watercolor classes and got an inexpensive set of paints. I have a little palette here that I'm mixing my paints in. I have a couple of brushes that I'm going to use. I have this brush that I use to spread the water onto my watercolor paper, and you can work on a Ranger craft mat, or like I have a particle board here that I really like because this is small and I can put this aside to dry and get out of my way. And this craft mat I've had absolutely forever. If you don't have one of these, well worth the investment. I've had it for probably since they came out with them. I love these round brushes for my paints, for doing things with my paints. And you need some water. I have two things of water, one for clean water and one for, dirty water, so that I can clean off my brush between paints. And I'm going to start by preparing my paints. And since I've already made a couple, I actually have this done. And I'm just going to wet my brush, and I'm going to go into this purple here. And I'm just going to wet that and activate it, and then I'm going to swish it around in here, maybe add a little more, and I'm going to get some clean water. I'm just going to drip that water in there, just a few drips. I really want this to be pretty watery, and the more watery you make it, the lighter the colors will be, and I kind of really like when the colors are light. I think it turns out really pretty. And my blue's drying up a tiny bit, but I'm just going to add some water just to reactivate that and mix that a little bit, so that's pretty good. So let me clean off this brush because I want to add my paints in a minute. Now I'm going to take the other flat brush. I really like this big flat brush, and I keep this just for adding water. I'm actually done with these paints. That's all I'm going to use those for. But I really like this big brush because I'm going to do a wet on wet technique, so my paper needs to be fairly wet. So I'm just dunking my brush in my bottle of water here. And I'm getting my paper pretty wet. The paper soaks up the water pretty quickly, especially because I have a little heater behind me. So it actually, you know, soaks it up. I may need to wet it again, so I'll keep this brush out. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my paints, and I'll start with blue. I'm just going to focus on one part of this paper, and that's a little bit darker than I wanted, but that's okay because I can lighten it by adding, ooh, I love the way it's spreading out. Watercolor is so cool because no two pieces ever turn out exactly alike, and you sort of have to like let go of the control because you just never know how it's going to come out. Okay, so that's it. That's all the watercolor painting I'm going to do. And it's kind of fun to just make a whole bunch of these. Once you have your supplies out, it's kind of fun to make a whole bunch of these. Now I do clean off my brushes right away and store them standing up so that the brush side is up. Now I'm going to take my stencil. I've already got some tape that I used earlier, and I'm going to put this stencil right down on top of it. And I'm going to run my finger over the top of the stencil, and you can't see this, but I can see that as I do this, the color and the wet paint, like the water and the wet paint, are wicking underneath this stencil. And I can see it as I move my fingers down. I'm just really gently rubbing my fingers against this. I don't want to in any way affect the paint on the paper. I just, you know, I'm not touching the paper, I'm just running my finger along the stencil like that. And now for me, the hard part is waiting for this to dry. Now I'm using the tape on the sides just to keep it flat, because you know how when you do watercolor sometimes the paper warps. I want to keep it as flat as possible, although I will put foam tape behind it just in case. So now I'm going to let that dry, and I will be back in a few minutes to show you the results. Okay, so at this point the paper itself is pretty dry. I can still tell that there's wet paint under it. So I'm going to very carefully remove this stencil just so you can see how cool this looks. Look how pretty that looks. And I'm going to now let this dry without the stencil on top. Okay, so this is dry now, and this is a little bit darker than my other ones. I didn't add as much water to the paints. I really like it. It's just different than the other ones, and I'm really happy with the way it came out. I really like that it's not covering the whole paper. I think that's pretty fun. And it almost looks like it's been there a while. As far as cleanup goes, I just wipe this off with a wet rag, and that's done because it's just watercolors. Now to complete my card, I've actually trimmed about a ½ inch from the top of this and about a1/4 inch from the bottom. And it's 4 inches wide, so now it measures 4 by 5 1/4, so that actually should be perfect. I haven't done anything to the sides. I can get rid of my watercolor stuff here. And as far as other supplies, I just need a few things. I've created this is a white embossed sentiment using the Eat Sleep on a piece of Perfect Plum cardstock, and it's just heat embossed in white. I've created my Create Script die cut, and on the back of this die cut I have used a piece of the Sizzix permanent adhesive, so the adhesive is already on there. I'm going to, since I have my card base here, this is cut 4 1/4 by 11. I scored at 5 1/2, and then I rounded the two bottom corners with my We Are Memory Keepers, it's the corner chomper, and I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom corners of this watercolor paper that I just made. And I think that's a fun little touch. Now another thing I'm going to do is, it's just a little tiny bit curled, but I have this 3M foam tape, and a lot of my instructors use this, and I really like it on the watercolor cards because it gives it dimension, plus it's really stiff, so it actually helps to straighten out the card a little bit. And I put a lot on this because I wanted to hold it flat, and it's just kind of big and unwieldy, but I got it at an electrical supply company. It was actually a pretty good deal, so I was pretty happy with that. So I like to cover the edges because this will really keep the card front flat, which is what my goal is. So this is pretty quick and easy card, and when you have all your watercoloring supplies out, if you do a bunch at a time and just set them aside to dry, you can have a whole card set done, and each card is unique because you can't really control that watercoloring. So like this one's a little darker than my other ones. Plus, if you have several stencils, you can make backgrounds with different stencils. So it's just quick and easy. Okay, now I'm going to line this up with the top of the card, and I want to center it on the front of this card. Not quite even across the top there. And one of the things I do like about this foam tape is that as long as I don't push down on it, I have a little wiggle room time here to adjust things a little if they don't feel quite right. Okay, so I'm going to put that down, and that does a really good job of actually straightening out that watercolor paper. Now I've got this Create Sentiment. Isn't this fabulous? Again, this is from Catherine Pooler, and I want to get this straight. Ordinarily I'm using my grid below, but I don't have that covered at the moment. And I'm going to put a little bit of glue on the back of this. I don't usually use my matte glue for this, but I will. And I want it over more actually, so I'm going to cut this down a little bit, make sure it's straight with my sentiment. Cut it with my paper snips. Oops, just like that, not very straight. Okay, then my last final touch, I have some iridescent sequins, and I have never been a huge fan of sequins. However, I discovered this quick stick from We Are Memory Keepers, and I really like it. It's got a sticky end. So I like to lay out my sequins, and this tool, this quick stick tool that I found from We Are Memory Keepers, really makes doing this a lot easier. And I just put a little dot of this multimedia matte from Ranger. I really like this for sequins. The great thing about this tool, it's got a sticky end, and you can peel the sticky stuff off, and then this just screws in and lets a little bit more sticky stuff out. So the sticky stuff will allow me to actually pick up the sequins, and since I have them laid out, I use the pointy end of this just to dab this glue, and then the pointy end I use to kind of hold the place of where I really want to put that, because if I'm picking them up, then I'm never going to get them in the same spot. And I do tend to be a little fussy. And one of the things that one of the instructors in the class, one of the classes that I took recently, said that one of her rules of thumb is that she puts the sequins down in triangles, which is what I've done here, and that they go diagonally across the main image, which is my create. And she said another way to do it is just to drop those sequins on and put them on where they fall, and there's sometimes just a lot of beauty in chaos. So I like that too. I do that once in a while too. But how quick and easy was that card to make, and isn't that background pretty? I just love that I've done 3 cards today. Here are 2 cards with exactly the same stencil, and they both look a little bit different. This one's soft and subtle. This one used the swirls or swoop. It was a swoop stencil. And again, all of this stuff is from Catherine Pooler. She just released this Eat, Sleep, Create set, and you can get the coordinating create script die, which I think is gorgeous. I've decided I'm just going to cut a bunch of those out and keep them around because I'll be using that all the time. I love that. So thanks so much for watching. Stop on my blog for more details about these cards at stampingimperfection.com. Thanks for watching.